And what Björk was describing earlier was this here on. You can actually ask us questions with your phones, and I'll try to get as many of them as I can. So please try it. We haven't tried this before. If we will have technical difficulties, we will use humor, like we learned this morning. Welcome, guys.
Seasoned means old, correct?
Well, I don't know. Well, excuse my French is off. Sorry. No. So I'm calling you legends, energy legends. And can you tell me how you deserve that to be called legends? Deryl, if we start with you.
That's a hard question. Can you start with Albert? No, that's a good question, and not one that I feel at all comfortable with asking. Jim and I were talking about the mistakes that we made. Jim has been in a public company, and so his mistakes have made the front page of the Wall Street Journal, where mine have been private, and I'd like to keep them that way. I think that I am the only person who has started or been the CEO of a retail energy company that has been sold twice in the industry. We looked at, several of us have gotten together over a beer and thought about others, but they slightly missed, I think. So I'm probably the only double problem person up here, in that we revamped Hudson Energy, and I was the CEO of it for about 4.5 years, and we sold it to Just Energy, which I think is represented in the audience. And then after starting Hudson Europe, and I became the CEO and minority owner of North American Power, and recently sold North American Power to Calpine Corporation, which, as far as I know, is not represented in your group. So I would suspect that would be why you would call me that. In addition to being quite old, probably. This whole concept of being a legend is a little bit disheartening to me. Donna's here. I don't know if she would like me being a legend or not, but I think that most legends are dead. So without trying to be morbid about this, Albert and Jim and I are very much alive. So I wish we could think of, I don't like living legends either, but hopefully we can come up with a better term.
We did discuss this in the briefing room earlier, because they said legends are dead, so we had a little of difficulties kind of adjusting. So Jim, what about you? Why would I call you a legend? Why would the world call you a legend?
Well, when I think about it, I kind of think about the conversation that I've had with my wife, and I start talking about my achievements, and she says, you're a legend in your own mind.
That sounds like
which I think is probably kind of the right way to think about it, because the reality is it's difficult to look back over your career and look at the things you think are the most important. So if I had to try to do that, I would probably say the fact that I've merged 5 different companies together to create the largest power company in the US might be the single achievement during 25 years as a CEO. But I think also I would point to leadership on environmental issues, specifically on carbon, on energy efficiency. Those things were really important to me and important to our company, and we developed a reputation or a brand for leading on those issues.
Okay. Maybe as a part of the intro, I'd like to point out that Jim actually was one of the 50 most influential people, according to, whom was it?
Newsweek,
right? And he was actually the first American CEO of an energy company to take side with the environment. And if you put that in perspective and what's happening today, I think it's quite an accomplishment. Albert.
I forgot to say, but Newsweek, my mom worked for Newsweek.
Oh, yes.
that wasn't the reason. That wasn't the reason.
Yeah. Okay, the third legend, Albert Albertsson, an Icelandic guy. And funnily enough, I met these gentlemen on more than one occasion, but I never met Albert before until today, an Icelandic guy. And there's 300,000 of us. So, Albert, what makes you a legend?
Yeah, it's difficult for me to look at me as a legend, because the legends I know of are all dead, as my friends did say here. But what I have been doing is actually formalizing what I call, or we call, resource park, geothermal resource park, meaning integrated use of all the resources we have. And as far as I know, I was the first here in this country anyway that did put this together or tried to formalize this concept. And I see now more and more of this thinking coming along here in Iceland and elsewhere. This is what I have been doing. It is no rocket science, it is only common sense.
Well, I'm going to ask you in a couple of seconds to tell us more about the resource park. But for those of you who don't know it, then part of the resource park by HS Orka is the Blue Lagoon. And you'll tell us maybe how it is a part of it. But the Blue Lagoon is one of the 25 wonders of the world by National Geographic. And 24 were made by God Almighty, and the 25th by this person. Yeah. I suppose. So tell us more about it. Tell us more about how it came to be, and tell us more about this closed circuit of things, as you said. When we were talking earlier, you told me that you looked to the American Indians, and how they used every part of the animal, and you adopted that philosophy to energy. I find it interesting.
Yeah, that's correct. Actually, the goal of the resource park concept is society without waste, to try to change our mindset, and thirdly, to support sustainable development in society by utilizing all the available resources in the best possible way. I think I can describe it best if you think of I'm coming from the geothermal industry. I have been there in that industry for over 40 years. If you think of a power plant as a box, into that box we get natural resources. And in this concept, we are to look at every single resource coming into the box as a valuable resource not to be wasted, meaning we have to use best available technology to harness or utilize them, technology which we can get. In exactly the same manner, we are to look at every single resource coming out of the box as a valuable resource, not to be wasted, but to be used in an environmental friendly way. Actually, people can see today at Svartsengi and at Reykjanes how this principle works. We have a resource park in Svartsengi, and which people can actually say. The resource park companies, they are nurtured actually by streams which the industry today classify as waste products or waste streams. And just to mention, the Blue Lagoon is the most famous one. They are using brine or geothermal water directly from the power plant. And at the Blue Lagoon, there are several pillars: the spa, a clinic treating people with psoriasis, research and development center, and a 5-star hotel. So this is just a spin-off. Then we have a company, Carbon Recycling International, taking approximately 10% of our gas, cleaning the gas, because our gas is a mix of carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide, and they are getting 7 streams from us, and they are making renewable methanol, which is a fuel, which is a blend for our fuel pool. And then we have fish farms, fish drying facilities, And one of the fish farms, we are operating 2 power plants, one at the very tip of the Reykjanes Peninsula. That one is unique in the geothermal industry. It is seawater cooled. We draw seawater from the Atlantic Ocean through a big lava bed into wells, drilled wells. We get very pure seawater at around 8 degrees C coming in through the condensers, and out comes 35 degrees seawater, which is a valuable resource. And now we have a big fish farm, almost high-tech fish farm, growing tropical fish. So this is an example how this little concept, this common sense works.
And if you weren't counting, I think that's 5 revenue streams that Albert has in that operation, which is really phenomenal. It's very valued by us capitalists.
Actually, we are selling power, we are selling hot water, we are selling groundwater distributed to the municipalities, we are selling steam, we are selling brine, we are selling lukewarm pure seawater, and so on and so forth.
And hydrogen.
And each one is a revenue stream to the company.
I think to pick up, this is common sense, but the saying, sense is not that common, so maybe people don't realize to do it. So I'm going to pick up that green issue, because sustainability and green is the same thing in the minds of the consumer. I've done a lot of research, and people don't really know what green is. They equate it with social responsibility or sustainability and a lot of different words. So the green issue, when we spoke on the phone, Deryl, then you said, and I quote, "I'm a capitalist. If people want green, I provide it to them, otherwise I don't care." Something like that. So
did I say I don't care? Okay.
Well, maybe you didn't say I don't care. You said, But anyway, this is not. I'm not being demeaning. It's just. It's a fact of life. This is the way you view business.
I have observed in this morning's meeting, as Maassen was up here earlier, and I could understand Maassen because he's a Texan like I am. But everybody was saying that you need to engage your customers and you need to listen to what your customers say, and then they go about trying to push upon their customer base something maybe that they hadn't thought of yet. And I understand that. It's the great Apple CEO indicated that he didn't do any market research because the customers didn't really know what they wanted yet, and he wanted to introduce them to that. But as a capitalist, the whole strategy here is to find out what your customer base wants, and then you provide it to them, and you provide it in a very efficient, cost-effective manner, and that's what drives that success. That's kind of what we were talking about.
Yeah, right. Jim, I think that you were actually in the middle of those gentlemen. Would you like to comment on this? And he is pure green through and through, a capitalist that provides green if people want it. Where are you in this?
Well, in life often you have to play the cards you're dealt. Yeah. And since I became the CEO of an existing company and then combined with a lot of existing companies, I had to play that card. And the card I held was we were the second or third largest emitter of CO2 in the US because of the amount of coal that we burn. We were one of the largest nuclear operators in the country. And so that combination of positions really forced us to take a pretty aggressive approach because, when you have a problem, you need to put a light on it, and our carbon emissions was a problem. And even though in the United States, the industry has really grappled with this problem, carbon is not an ideology in the US like it may be in the EU. There's lots of differences of opinion, but I would dare say that the power sector has actually addressed carbon. They've actually they have a lot more action than talk. And what I mean by that is they've reduced their carbon footprint 27% off 2005. And I think that would probably match with most power sectors around the country and across Europe. They've also, at the same time, really worked to reduce SOx, NOx, mercury. So when you run a power company, you have a huge environmental footprint. emissions, you use the land. And so coming up with an approach that minimizes the impact on the environment is critical. And if you're going to be sustainable, you have to address your problems, and you have to, at the end of the day, start to solve them. And I should say in the US, there are no mandates on carbon. So what the power sector has done, this 27% reduction, is without carbon pricing, without carbon regulation. It's all about seeing around the corner and knowing that we're moving to a more decarbonized world and preparing the company. And I think we are really focused on getting positioned to deal with what's coming. And that's really a critical part of leadership in any company.
As it relates to green, Jim was saying something as we met behind, and if you don't mind, I'll repeat it. Those of us that are from Texas, we like to think of Texas as a separate country as opposed to just part of the United States. But if we were a separate country, I think that our economy would amount to the 10th largest economy in the world if we were a separate country. But if we were a separate country, we would have the 5th largest amount of renewable energy generation. Is that right?
This is the first time that I've heard a Texan understate something. Because actually, they're the 4th largest, if they were a country, of all wind generators.
Yes. And I don't think that is in any small degree to the fact that Texas is, in the United States at least, is the most decentralized, unregulated, deregulated, liberalized market in the country, of which we've broken up the utilities into generation, which is totally competitive, and the wires and pipes business, which is regulated, and then the retail business, which is totally unregulated. And so that competitiveness has driven us to be able to grow fast in the state and also to produce that amount of wind in the marketplace.
Having owned wind facilities in Texas, I'd also say they have a hell of a lot of wind, which makes it almost a perfect state to maximize the output from your wind turbines. And that's another great advantage that Texas has.
Okay, we have a quality problem because there's so many questions. I have to kind of choose from it. So I kind of summarize. And actually, one of them was actually what we discussed before. If you were starting over and you were with your experience, what would you do differently today? And while you were at it, what was your biggest mistake that you should have done differently, that you learned from?
You're going to start with Jim on this, aren't you?
Or maybe I'll start with you, Albert.
Oof. I think when it comes to this resource park concept, I think I would be doing more or less the same. But when I look back 40 years, there are so many, what shall I say, things which I think I failed on. I can take you through the power plant history of 40 years. And when you see the development or the development of the technology, then almost every 10th step I ask myself, why didn't we do this before? Mm-hmm. We can call it failures, but it is failures when it comes to economy. We could have done it a bigger scale, a little bit different technology, and produce the energy at a lower price. But I am pretty satisfied with this resource park concept that we are on the right track. One thing which I want to, one part of it which I didn't mention is I mentioned the sustainability, to support sustainability in society. In that concept, there is an inherent time scale. We in this industry in Iceland, producing hot water and serving people with groundwater and power, we have to think ahead, at least 50, 100 years ahead. And I always get the question, very often get the question, for how long time does the resource last? Of course, we don't have any crystal ball. We cannot say that, but we have educated guess depending on the data we have. But we are part and started the Icelandic deep drilling project in the year 2000. We recently drilled a well down to almost 4,700. We reached so-called supercritical conditions, and we discovered that the resource is much, much bigger than we thought it was. In doing this, in investing in this highly risk project, we looked actually at least 100 years ahead, and we know what harnessable resources, we have a good feeling we have. So that is a very important thing to think ahead.
Right. Okay. Jim, maybe if you will take what would you do differently? What was your one single biggest mistake that taught you some valuable lesson?
Sure. I mean, first of all, in 1988, I entered the industry as a chairman of the board and CEO, and I was 41 years old. So the way I would improve on that is I would join the industry at 31 as chairman and CEO. That'd be the first thing I'd do differently. It's not bad entering an industry in that role. I can't even imagine a better role. But the second thing is that the purpose of the industry, I was listening to the conversation on the prior panel, I thought was really quite good. And I think the point is being crystal clear about your purpose and sharing it, as Rosemary from Ireland said in plain English, is really important. And I got our purpose, and then when I realized that every morning I wake up, I'm transforming the lives of millions of people by providing electricity to their homes and businesses, and electricity became the great enabler of the economy of the 20th century in the US and around the world, knowing that was the mission is important. What I would change if I'm in this role as CEO is I would work harder to create the capability to deal with change within the people in the company. It's important that people are comfortable with change, but they also need the capability to embrace change and the capability to create change. And so what you really want, and they all can't be that, and the guys that run our nuclear plants can't be into creating change, quite frankly. They need to be focused on that. But the most important thing is to have a mix of people that have those capabilities. I would dare say for an employee, table stakes is being comfortable with change. But if you really want to rise up and achieve, you got to be in the position to help create change, because in a world of great change, you create greater opportunities for your customers as well as for those who invest in you. In terms of mistakes, hell, I've had a lot. I mean, Harvard did a case study, and they wrote it. I go, wow, that's great. And then they said, name some things that you didn't do so well during that time. And I came up with 18. And sure as hell, they incorporated all 18 failures in the case. I wasn't planning on that, but probably, I mean, I lost money with the trading business, but I made it better afterwards. And that's really the point, that making it better afterwards. I didn't walk away from the business. I retooled, reinvested, and ultimately sold that business for over $600 million after losing $100 million 5 years later. But the point is, resilience is really important. Failure is natural. If you're always pushing the limit, you're going to fail. But the ability to learn from it, to pick yourself up, to go forward, to really motivate your people to say, okay, we blew that, let's get going. And so thinking about failure in the right way is important, but what you do after you fail is the most important thing.
Good words.
Well, the reason I thought we should start out with Jim is because I have been fortunate enough to be the CEO of private companies. He's had the misfortune of being a CEO of a public company, so all of his mistakes get amplified in the Wall Street Journal. Mine are private, and I'll probably keep them that way. The one that comes to mind, though, is when we started Direct Energy business. I was responsible for the U.S. operation, located in Texas. And you know Direct Energy is Centrica, British Gas. And this was new after deregulation, and we staked our claim in direct sales. And then we started a small broker type function, but we knew that wouldn't catch on very much. And as the direct sales started dwindling, the broker sales started growing. And when I started talking to our customers, again, these were commercial, non-residential customers, they said, look, they trust having a broker in the transaction to keep the price low and to keep stuff that we would normally throw in there as a paragraph in the contracts out, because they knew the business very well and they trusted someone that was representing them. So in the next venture, which was Hudson, it was a broker-only C&I business because customers really wanted to use that broker business. I think that's historical. I don't think it'll be that way forever in the future, but that was right at the time. It was a bit like Edison I think he tried several times before he got the right filament for the electric light bulb. So continue to listen to what the customers say, as one of the panel sessions had.
I had a question, and one of the questions from your audience resembles it. I want to read it out aloud. Given your experience of a demanding business environment, how would you recommend branding sustainability and renewable energy to non-believers? So how can you actually, the question stands. Do you understand it well enough to reply?
How do
you make green and sustainable sexy?
I don't know that you have to make it sexy,
right?
because let's talk about the evolution, at least in the U.S., at least in the retail energy sector. When I first started out, for a commercial customer to want green, that was unheard of. No business wanted anything but the lowest price so they could get a little bit higher profitability and they could reduce their price. So especially large users of energy wanted low price, low price, low price. And then over time, it crept into that, no, let's try a 10% green or a 40% green, or in some even 100% green, of people that are in extremely competitive businesses. So that has evolved, and my observations are more in the C&I space because I've had more firsthand experience in that space. So I'm not sure that we as suppliers of energy need to be responsible for communicating to the customer why they should do something as opposed to something else, but you should be very, very quick to respond to it.
I think
Good
the
answer.
way you make renewables, and I love the way people talk about renewables because they're picking a technology. People should be talking about carbon-free electricity. And today in the US, 60% of the carbon-free comes from nuclear, interestingly enough. And so carbon-free is the mission. But the way you make renewables sexy is you make them affordable. Now, the price of solar panels has fallen 80%. Wind turbines prices have fallen dramatically, and that's made them more acceptable. I mean, we've invested a lot. I mean, when I was Duke, invested a lot, over $4 billion in renewables, but we did it outside of the areas where we had our primary vertically integrated monopolies. But when the prices fell to where they were competitive, we then worked hard to bring solar and wind to our customers in the regulated businesses. And an example of that is 5 years ago in North Carolina, we had very little solar. And today, North Carolina is number 2 in the production of solar behind California. So when the price gets right, that's a timing issue. And in life, being right about timing in sports and a lot of things is really critical. And so for our own customers, while we were selling it to others outside our area, at the higher prices, when it got cheap, we brought it to our customers.
Would you like to comment on this? Because your vision is to be sustainable and use everything up. I mean, all the resources and use them wisely.
Yeah, and everybody knows that here we in Iceland have only renewable energy. Our hot water and our power, hydro and geothermal. So it is difficult to convince people. Then we had to convince them to not to use it, but that is strange.
Right. So, interestingly enough, our time is almost over. But I want to. I'm sorry for those who sent questions I couldn't cover, but I hope the gist of it is covered here. I want to ask you, because you've been in the business for a long time, or you entered the business a long time ago, because this is a communication conference, how energy companies within the energy space, how they communicate. What's your observation on the changes in communication from the energy companies? Could you elaborate on how they have changed? I'm sure they have changed, but how have they changed? Daryl, maybe you want to...
Yeah, if the way you used to communicate to your customers, back in the day was you would have a radio spot or a television spot, and you would try to communicate on a mass basis. Now there's lots more technology to communicate on an individual basis, and companies that I've run, we try to lead with technology, and so the way that me as the 12th entrant into that marketplace can beat the first or the second or the third is to use technology, because they're dealing off of 2000 and I'm dealing off of 2018 technology. So the better ability to get portals and shove to the customer what their consumption patterns are and what their prices are is the great advantage in the marketplace today.
All right.
I personally, in the power sector, we have always marketed around safety, because that's such an important thing with electricity. And that's almost a branding in terms of using electricity safe and being safe within the company. But I would say you have to move from, we're an engineering companies. I just happen to be a lawyer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you don't want engineers doing your communication. Flashing pictures of your power plant doesn't mean much to people. What you really want is content. And as I listened to Emma from E.ON, I thought having an emotive aspect of your communication is important. As I listened to Rosemary this morning, the plain English is important. But the ability to connect with people at a really fundamental level is the type of communication that you need. They don't care really where it comes from. They don't care whether it's nuclear or coal. No customer has ever asked me, did that come from a nuclear plant or a coal plant or a gas plant or renewables? They really don't care. What they really care about is meeting their needs in a way that's affordable, it's reliable, it's secure. And I think the way I would say it, kind of in a last word, is kind of connecting. And every person's different. Yes, you can use social media. Yes, you can use ads. Probably the most important communication is face-to-face. And let's be real. Most utility customers never interface with utility unless there's an outage or we screwed up their bill. And then they call us and they're basically unhappy. And so the ability to turn those into good experiences, hard to do, but also to have a proactive message. It has to come not from the CEO, not just from communications. It's got to come from a range of people. And that's why really driving the message through the organization, where when you're in a supermarket and one of your neighbors comes up to you and says, tell me about this, you have a way to connect to them about what your business is all about and how you're solving those problems in a real human way.
Absolute last question, because the clock is blinking here. Short answers. This is from the audience. So first of all, which three energy legends should be on this stage next year? And which ones should be on stage in charts 2037? So which one should be next year? And which legend should be on stage in 20 years?
We don't know who's going to be alive. So we get back to this. The good news that, and I would like to congratulate you guys, Fridrik, and your team for a great conference. It's the first time I've been here. I also noticed the mix is decidedly European as opposed to American, so some of us are going to carry back to the U.S. side to try to get more involvement. So I would encourage you to continue to use the American guys in this side. Give us a little bit of credit for having a large country. Like Texas.
We both lived in Texas.
Yes.
He lived there a long time. I lived there long enough to learn how to really brag like a Texan.
Yeah.
And I've almost got that down. But I would say next year, I would pick 3 people that you believe someday may be legends, who are young, who are aggressive, who are thinking about the business differently, who tell a story in a passionate way. That's the people I would bring. And I wouldn't worry about the out years. They will take care of themselves.
Yeah. Send me the names in, if you will. If you have comments, send it to my phone here. We'll touch them, talk to them. And you, Albert, this is the last question of the panel. Next year in 20 years' time?
I don't know. I agree. Some young, aggressive people which have story to tell, which are eager to move things forward. And my last comment is this: business is about people. Business is about creating trust in between people, and business is about nature, the intellectual nature. We should be living in the nature, not on it.
Really good last words. Outstanding. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.